It's my pleasure to introduce Chris Pollard, the GIS manager for the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, DVRPC. He has over 20 years experience at DVRPC producing high-quality cartographic products, performing spatial analysis, and developing web mapping applications. Chris is passionate about all aspects of geospatial technology and dedicated to finding ways to improve DVRPC's interactive maps and data visualizations to educate the public about regional, transportation, and environmental planning within the greater Philadelphia area. Mr. Pollard received his bachelor's degree in geography from Kutztown University. Since 2012, he's been an adjunct professor at Rowan University, teaching the introduction of mapping and GIS, cartography, and web GIS. So please join me in welcoming Chris Pollard.
All right, morning everyone. It's cool, it's interesting being back here. I was just in Drexelbrook a few months ago with my teenage daughter, who's a freshman in high school, and we were here for a father-daughter dance. So I'm not expecting all of you to get up and sing Taylor Swift and Katy Perry, but if someone hears a little Neil Diamond and starts singing Sweet Caroline, that's fine, because all the fathers are up on the dance floor going nuts and doing that. So which is great. So like Margaret, thank you for that introduction. So my name is Chris Pollard. I'm the GIS manager at the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission. And I'm here to talk to you about using GIS for bicycle and pedestrian optimization, or in other words, talking about a lot of the GIS and web mapping tools that we have at the Planning Commission that can help you all with some of the work you're doing in regards to bicycle and pedestrian planning. So who is the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission? So for those of you, can I see a hand who has heard of the DVRPC before? Sweet, all of you. All right. Who here has used GIS before? So I've got awesome. So your slides this morning were almost right. There was a 40% that said GIS tools and use for planning. So I was happy to sort of see that. So. Anyway, so the Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission, as you know, we're the MPO for the greater Philadelphia region. And so we do a lot of work on both sides of the state. And we work with 350 municipalities in about 9 counties. So we deal with a lot of different entities, and our geography and the work that we do is disparate and different. We work in sort of the urban environment as well as work in the rural environment as well. So it's an interesting field and interesting organization to work for. But recently, last year, we did some retooling, rethinking at DVRPC. We're seeing a lot of these new cutting-edge technologies and innovations out there, some of these new tools that people can utilize. And we had some retirees that sort of retired, and we thought about how can we sort of retool to be ready for sort of the new workforce coming in. So some of our newer hires are coming in with a lot more technical and programming and coding skills. And so we thought, what's a good way to do that? So we decided to create a new unit called Planning Innovation. And so the goal of the Planning Innovation was to build a culture that fosters innovation in the planning field through collaboration and knowledge sharing. So we didn't want the GIS office to be those that were working in the dark, attached to our computers, not talking to anyone, and just doing all the work ourselves. We wanted to sort of be able to get out there and create tools, create some standards and some policies, and be able to share that with the planning staff to allow them to sort of think differently how they could sort of work with their planning partners, work with the public, and sort of think about planning in the field that they're working in. Nestled under this Planning Innovation Unit, we also brought in our Data Coordination Unit. So instead of having data coordination sitting over in IT, makes a little bit more sense for stronger collaboration to have both the GIS office and sort of our tabular information and our data sort of all underneath one umbrella, working together. And we created a new department called Planning Technology. So this was going to sort of be our new data science. I'm sure all of you have heard this term, data scientists out there. So we wanted to bring them in and sort of start building our team out. So not just our typical map makers and GIS staff, but those that may be using R or using other better scripting and big data. So we realized that we could sort of strengthen the team by sort of having sort of all of these units together. So our planning innovations core functions, like I'd mentioned, I talked a little bit about setting up standards and resources and training for our planning commission, for our staff, as well as data governance and management. Something that we really hadn't had in place at DVRPC, and we were seeing with new staff coming in and new interns that everyone was doing things differently. You know, namings of files and conventions were different, storing files, different locations. And obviously with COVID happening and a lot of us are working from home, you know, everyone's workflows and the development they were working in to do GIS or to do planning data was completely different. And so it made collaboration really hard. So we thought about how best we could sort of set up and sort of educate not only ourselves, but our planning staff to be able to work more efficiently with some of the tools we had. Infrastructure planning around GIS. So we also realized with COVID that, you know, having a server room with all of our information stored in the office might not be the most efficient. You know, so if the power goes out in the building and our web servers go down, that means our GIS, all of our GIS information is gone, goes down, and all of our web mapping applications go down. So, you know, we realized, hey, we should start thinking about a plan to migrate all of that technology to the cloud. You know, so that if we're not in the office or if anyone's out in the field, municipalities, counties, whoever needs to access our data, they'll be able to access it through the cloud and we'll be able to stay up and running. So this is something that we're seeing not only at, you know, at DVRPC, but also some of our county planning commissions are looking about that as well. And lastly, product development. So building a lot of different web mapping applications. We're seeing this growth of planners coming with skills with building Esri story maps or using Esri platforms. So we wanted to sort of allow those planning staff to sort of professionally develop and grow, but we wanted to sort of set some restrictions on sort of how they're building their mapping applications and how they're using some of this technology. So we came up with this vision statement, you know, around data culture. So we want to be able to democratize data at the commission by emphasizing fluency and transparency to drive more data-driven decisions regionally. So what this means is we want to be able to empower the staff at DVRPC, empower everyone to be able to leverage data in their work in the way that they're comfortable to allow for innovation in our approaches and to enhance our deliverables that are available to our community partners and our planners. So we wanted to make sure that we have sort of reliable data that we can sort of work on, that we can generate and we can build on. And we also want to sort of make sure that with these new technologies and tools out there, that we can sort of script in and sort of rerun a lot of these analysis and processes when we get in new data. You know, because we're seeing a lot of big data that's out there and we're bringing it into our reports. So, you know, instead of just working in a silo, working on one project, and if a certain staff member leaves and we can't rerun that process again, you know, we want to sort of look to the future. So we have these three keywords we're trying to use: visible, accessible, and reliable. So you'll see that throughout the presentation when I get to talking about some of our initiatives. So the Office of GIS. So we are responsible for providing GIS, cartographic, web mapping, and spatial analysis support to all of our different planning departments at DVRPC. You know, our long-range plan, our transit, bike, and pedestrian planning, smart growth, safety, you know, the new growing field of looking at sustainability in the environment. So a lot of some of these departments have planning staff that have GIS skills. But we're there to help support them, so we can mentor them, or we can do a lot of the work for them ourselves. So pretty much set up a shop of about 5 of us right now in the GIS department, and we've all been there over or close to 20 years. So that's something to say about sort of the work we do, and we have some history with working with a lot of the work we have. But we also do work for our member governments, our transit agencies, so SEPTA right next door there. We work with them a lot on some of our projects. Public and private consultants. So when it comes to doing certain corridor studies or work within our work program projects, we're there to sort of help provide the data and provide the resources to whomever that we're working with. GIS software, so we're an industry standard, so we use Esri's software and technology. So we use ArcGIS Desktop. We've been migrating to this new GIS software called ArcGIS Pro. So this is sort of the future of desktop GIS. We utilize Esri's ArcGIS Online, so I'm sure a lot of you have seen sort of ArcGIS Online web maps. Obviously during COVID, there was the Johns Hopkins dashboard. So that was built off Esri's GIS technology. We utilize Portal for ArcGIS. So this is sort of what houses all of our GIS data on the back end. So how we were able to both use it internally as well as publish it and push it to the outside, to the public, and into our web mapping applications. And we utilize something called ArcGIS Open Data. So this is sort of our data hub that I'll talk a little bit about how we're sort of getting our data out there. And more recently, we've been working with QGIS, wanting to sort of be accessible. And so QGIS is an open source desktop GIS software. So we're seeing sort of an increase, like I'd mentioned, from new hires coming in, having more skills in different planning tools, more GIS tools. So QGIS works both on MacBooks as well as PCs. So during COVID, it was great because even though you might not have had access to your ArcGIS software, downloading and working in QGIS, you were still able to sort of work with and create GIS data and run some analysis. So I encourage you, if any of you are running into issues using Esri's environment or want to look at different options, QGIS is a really good desktop software. But we do more than just make maps. The GIS unit is responsible, like I said, we're responsible for our enterprise GIS database. So we've got over 150 different GIS data sets. Some of it's DVRPC data, some of it's our sort of different agencies, PennDOT, New Jersey DOT, or county data that we utilize, or different state agencies. So we make sure that we have the most up-to-date and recent GIS data sets for our planning staff to use in a lot of the work that they're doing. We'll do spatial analysis and data visualization. So, I spent a good 18 years at DVRPC doing a lot of our web mapping application development. So I've had the pleasure of doing and working with really cool data visualization tools and seeing sort of that grow over the decades to be able to sort of create some really cool applications. But in the GIS also, we really care about sort of accurate and reliable geospatial data. Because we realize, in order to foster regional data-driven decisions, you need to have these really good, accurate, quality data. So, on a regional level, if you were to draw sort of proposed trail or draw in a new rail line, you zoom in and you turn on aerial imagery, and you go to print that map out and go to public comment or share it with somebody. You can sort of see here, we don't want that proposed rail line running through buildings, going through the Publix or someone's backyard, or in this case, running and dead-ending into a pond or waterway. So this is an example of looking at the King of Prussia light rail that they were proposing to the high-speed line there that SEPTA was proposing. So that really leads to effective and trustworthy communication. So public engagement, or if we're pushing that data and sending it to our county planning partners to feed into their master plans, we want to make sure that our data and our information is nice and reliable for them. At DVRPC, we produce a lot of publications. So I'm sure most of you have gone to our website and you've downloaded one of our publications, or you've looked at our reports or pointed someone to it. This is great. They look pretty. They're amazing. But if you're downloading a PDF and you're like me and you're working in GIS, how can I get that data, right? Like, you guys want to use and you consume that data in the work that you're doing. So this is great for being visible and getting our information out there and educating people on the work we're doing. They can read about the methodology, but the data is trapped inside a PDF, or trapped inside that appendix. So what we've done at DVRPC is we thought of a way, all right, we've been doing a really great job of publishing and sharing our GIS data for years. But how can we share our tabular data? So how can we take that data that's trapped in the appendix of the PDF and get that into the hands of people who want to utilize it? So we recently rolled out something called the DVRPC Data Center. And so what this is sort of your one-stop shop for all things GIS as well as tabular data. So you can come here to the data catalog, pretty self-explanatory. There's all these different themes that you can search by, and you can sort of utilize it sort of like a catalog to find the information you might be looking for. So whether that's related to bicycle and pedestrian, whether that's related to equity or some of the other work that we're doing or you might see in some of these reports, as well as some of our forecasting data and information. So previously, a lot of that data has just been sort of trapped. You've had to email somebody. So this checks the box for visible and accessible, as well as reliable. But within Data Catalog, it's built on an open source technology called CCAN. So on the back end, we're sort of hosting and consuming our GIS data and our tabular data. And so users could come in here, they can search by the theme that they're looking for. So for this case, it's bicycle and pedestrian, and you might be looking for GIS data. So you get a handful of different results there, and selecting your result opens up our open GIS data portal. So it's right inside sort of our data catalog. You'll get a preview of the data. And so if you're not 100% sure what you're looking for, you get a good visual of it right here. You have a handful of different functionalities. You can actually click on the map, and so you can look at the attributes that are in there. Because I know, when like Margaret had mentioned earlier, I also teach at Rowan University. So when students are looking for data and they go and they download all this GIS data, and then they want to make a thematic map, or they want to use some sort of, they want to sort of style the map differently. But then when we go and open up the attribute table, there's no information in it. It's just the features. So this sort of alleviates that headache. You can actually click on the line work and actually see the information and the attributes that are part of these GIS data sets. Other beautiful thing that Esri has with their open data is, down in the bottom there, it says, I want to use this. So if you want to use this data set and you want to sort of publish a web map, or you want to share it with your local community members or someone else at your agency, you can go and you can utilize the information and data we have to create a map. You can start building your own story map. So if you happen to have an ArcGIS Online account, whether it's public or through your agency, you can start to consume and utilize this data in some of the work that you have. And those of you that might be dabbling in coding and sort of wanting to be able to sort of access and build web mapping applications, or you have more robust GIS data tools, all this data, it can be accessed through what's called an API. So you can hit the server, you can hit our server and consume our data. So you don't necessarily need to download all the information yourself and have it stored on a computer. You can actually utilize the technology we have to be able to rely on that information. Accessible. So one of the things that I've learned over the years of working at DVRPC is not everyone has desktop GIS software. They might want a GIS data set, but they might want it in some sort of open data format. So, there are a few options here. You can actually download the GIS data in typical shapefile format or GeoJSON, but there's KML options as well. And KMLs open up in Google Earth. And so it's an open platform that a lot of people are used to seeing and working with. So we've had some municipalities over in New Jersey, and their traffic engineer wanted to sort of take our traffic counts and some of our trail network that we have and overlay it with data that he's been maintaining in Google Maps for years. And so that person was able to come right here, download a KML file, and simply load that in with all of his data and his work. So it sort of really alleviated and helped sort of his process. And a CSV, so sometimes you just want a data table, right? Not everything needs to be a map. So sometimes you just want a sort of a list of features with some other attribute information in it. Yes, so if anyone here who's had the tedious task of filling out metadata knows how dreadful it can be. Sometimes can take a lot of work. Sometimes you choose the wrong formatting of metadata, and it just doesn't come across. So, metadata is all about sort of the information about the data. So I always find this to be great because when I share this with some of my students, sometimes it goes over their head. I'm dating myself. I had a slide here, and it was actually Clark Griswold sitting down with Russ and Audrey, showing them the triptych, how they were going to get from Chicago to Wally World. And all the kids I was like, who's that? And they're like, we don't know. And I'm like, oh, you're not kids from the 80s, right? So, I've got to sort of transition some of my slides. But anyway, so metadata. So this also helps out as well. So one of the things you can do built inside our Open Data GIS portal is we can maintain our metadata in-house on our portal. And by publishing that internally, it goes to the outside. So folks can come in here and read a little bit about the information that we put into our GIS features. So this way they can sort of look at what type of, our equity analysis that we do is a sort of a big data set that's really popular at DVRPC. It's looking at sort of different population groups, looking at census data and seeing sort of where those disadvantaged population groups are spread throughout the region at the census tract level. So we do a really good job, I feel, of filling out our metadata to give the user as much information that they can to sort of learn a little bit about the methodology, as well as track that data back to sort of its original source. Like I said, Open Data GIS. So this is sort of a different flavor. So the data catalog is sort of your menu, finding everything. But if you just really want GIS data, we also have out there our DVRPC Open GIS data portal as well. So this is just strictly our GIS data. Doesn't have as many of the data results that you'll find. The tabular data is not in here. But just in case you Google and you end up on a different page, you're still in the same agency. You'll still find your GIS data that you need. Looks a little different with the filters here. You can just sort of find, like I said, just looking for the GIS data sets. It has all the same features, but it's full screen and not sort of embedded in our data catalog. So shifting gears just a little bit. So I want to talk our web mapping platform. So like I said, I've had the pleasure of not having to sort of work just within the Esri environment, but I've had the pleasure, upper management has sort of allowed us to be innovative, use open source tools and use some different mapping platforms that are out there. So sometimes we run into limitations with certain off-the-shelf web mapping application products. So we spent some time developing and building custom web mapping applications internally. So we've had a handful of decent staff that have had some skills along with myself, and we've grown our products over time. So we use something called Mapbox and Leaflet. So these are open source JavaScript mapping libraries that allow you to do different functionality, so you can sort of build some custom interactions and layouts from them. But our maps and apps have a new home. So within Data Center, previously we had our interactive maps page. But from Data Center, you can get to maps and apps. And just like it's pretty obvious, it just sort of lists out our list of about 70 different mapping applications that we have. And we're slowly building this out. So this may change. You may see a different interface here in the next few months. But we're adding different filter functionalities and different cards. And this might look a little bit different if you go to visit it like in 3 months. But all of our mapping applications you can find here, all in one sort of resource. So what I want to do now is talk, like I'd said, talking about the bicycle and planning optimization. So talking about a handful of different web mapping applications that we have geared towards bicycle and pedestrian planning. So the 4 that I'm going to talk about are the Greater Philadelphia Pedestrian Portal, Access Score, Bicycle LTS, and a more recent one, our Sidewalk and Street Tree Screening Tool. This is something we worked on last summer as a little pilot project to sort of see what type of traction we might get from it. Can I see, raise your hands, how many people have been to our walk.dvrpc.org? It's our pedestrian portal. All right, cool. So a handful of you, so this will be new to some of you. So a few years ago, we came to the realization that we're looking at regional data sets, and our planning staff was always asking, hey, is there a GIS data set of sidewalks out there? We want to use it in our corridor planning and our studies that we're doing, our safe routes to school, and a lot of our pedestrian planning projects and work that we were doing. So that wasn't available, so DVRPC took it on ourselves to collect for our 9-county region a regional data set of all the sidewalks. And so we built this web mapping application so that users could come in and explore it. But we realized that so much development is going on across our region. New subdevelopments are going in and new sidewalks are being built, that it's hard for us to sort of reach out and collect all that information from different entities. So we came in here and we actually created a function so that we could have citizens planners or local municipalities actually come in here and sort of either send us new GIS data, or sort of there's an edit function where they can submit fixes, changes, and new sidewalks that we would then sort of QA, QC, and sort of get that into the regional data set. But what I want to talk most about today, or a little bit today, is our sidewalk gap analysis. So instead of just having a map viewer that you can see data and click on it, we wanted to do a little bit more. So we developed an analytical pipeline so that we could sort of take those sidewalk data, look at center lines, look at schools, look at transit. We can run some analysis and we can sort of figure out where are the gaps in the system. So where can we build, or where can we put new sidewalks to make improvements to connectivity and safety and in the region. So one of the visualizations in here is actually just quickly and simply looking at which roadway segments are missing sidewalks. So users could come in, they can zoom into their location, and they can quickly see areas and neighborhoods and communities that have sidewalks, that don't have sidewalks, or maybe have partial sidewalks to them. And so this is a really good screening tool for our planners when they're going into communities and neighborhoods that they haven't been before, where we might not have worked with those local municipalities or the communities. So they get an idea sort of what type of infrastructure, sidewalk infrastructure do they have. Another question was, where are there disconnections between transit stops and the sidewalk network? So we utilized that information. We brought it into a different coding platform to be able to run these analysis. So we could do it sort of seamlessly and quickly. What we came up here was a walk time to the nearest transit stop. So each of these intersections, roadway intersections, you can sort of see based on walking on the sidewalk, shows you how far they might be from a bus stop or a transit stop. So, when we talk about equity, when we talk about sort of the communities that are in need of transit and transportation, and can they get there safely? This is a really good data set that we like to bring in and take a look to see how accessible are those communities to public transit. Something else that's really good is this is our islands of sidewalk connectivity. So if you were out there and you were like one of my neighbors and you just wanted to walk and walk and walk on sidewalks and see how far you can get being connected, this is sort of a data set that you can turn on. You can see here you've got these sort of neon green sidewalks. They're all connected to each other with crosswalks and curb cuts. So you can sort of make your way through different neighborhoods. But you can also visually see where their sidewalks are connected to anyone else. And this is a good way of sort of looking at the gaps quickly. Where are there gaps in sidewalks? What type of connectivity can you make to them? And then with all this other data we have in GIS, we decided we wanted to create some walk sheds. So looking at a 1-mile walk shed with our sidewalk network and the roadway network, we wanted to see how far from transit stops the public can get simply from walking. And we wanted to score them against each other. So you wanted to see, are there locations and transit stops where walking and sort of like, on a sidewalk, as well as walking not on a sidewalk, how far that can get you and what that outreach is. So you can see here, green polygon shows a 1-mile walk shed on the sidewalk network. So, if you were getting from that transit station there and you're from Rosemont and you were getting to a particular location, a job, or your kid was going to a certain school, you want to make sure that they're able to safely walk on sidewalks to their destination. Next, we have our bicycle level of service. So this is our LTS and connectivity analysis. So what this does, it's a regional screening tool that we did that looks at not walking, but more cycling. So how comfortable does cyclists feel riding their bike on a road? And so LTS looks at different types of characteristics of roadway. Looks at speed, looks at shoulder width, looks at length. And so what it does is it comes up with these scores of LTS 1, 2, 3, and 4 to talk about comfortability. So how far, you can see here, all these light green and dark green roads are what's considered LTS 1 and 2, which consider that most people would be comfortable riding their bikes on those roads. And so what this analysis does, it helps us look at and see where can we find improvements to facilities that might have the greatest impact, both locally and regionally. So that, we've got this initiative at DVRPC called the Circuit Trails, where we want to sort of create paved trails and paved roadways and sharrows and bike paths. So this really helps us narrow down, because we don't have a lot of funding, where would be the biggest impact if we sort of were to build a new trail or to build a connection for some of these roadways. So we decided the LTS network went through different iterations. And so one of the things we decided to do was we wanted to sort of build a story map. We wanted to sort of explain what is an LTS and talk about some of the analysis that we have done with that data set and sort of get that across to the user, or maybe give them some ideas to think about how they could use this data. So we built a scrolling story map where you can scroll through and you can learn about what an LTS is. You can look at different sort of communities that we've highlighted and talk about and looks at some of the benefits if there was improvements made to those roadways. And then we also have sort of the data explorer. So this allows users to come in and explore the LTS different analyses, and then they can do some different filterings based on some of the analysis that we've done. They can look at some of those equity and those sort of disadvantaged communities and how they sort of score with the LTS, and look at connectivity within those neighborhoods. We've also added in connectivity to transit, schools, and trails as well, because we all know that sort of those are sort of the importance. There's a lot of activity as far as bicycling and pedestrian, in regards to transit, schools, and trails. So Access Score came out of sort of the, was a combination of, we had this new LTS data, we'd done some sidewalk gap analysis looking at walk sheds. So we had some new tools in place and some new data. So a few years ago, we worked on something. In 2014, we worked on an application called Ride Score, which looked at different characteristics around regional rail transit stations, and different demographics, cultural features, jobs, population, open access to green space. So we did some characteristics of just sort of looking at sort of like as a crow flies from each of these transit stations and scored them against each other. It was a project that we did for SEPTA because they had limited money to make improvements to transit stations. And they wanted to use this Ride Score screening tool to be able to sort of compare transit stations to one another, to sort of figure out which transit station would be sort of a better project to make improvements to. So 2 years ago, we decided that we wanted to make improvements to that Ride Score, but we wanted to look at all access of transit stations. So not just regional rail, but trolley and subway. So we created Access Score, which sort of does walk sheds and creates these catchment areas around all transit stations, and looks at how those transit stations are supportive to bicycling and walking in that area, and how much bike and pedestrian activity could be occurring there. So we wanted to look at different factors. So we created 3 different scores. Something called Access Score, which is just based on driving. So how far can you get driving 2 miles from a transit stop? Cycle Score, which is how far can you get biking on those LTS levels 1 and 2 from transit stations. And then Pedestrian Score, so how far can someone get walking on sidewalks from transit stations? And so you can see the different colored lines there. Those are sort of the catchment areas. So that's as far as you can go within a 1 mile or 2 mile radius using sort of those 3 different types of modes. So what this analysis did was to sort of take those catchment areas and look at a whole bunch of different characteristics, the built environment around those transit stations, so that you get an idea of what is, like I'd said, what does bicycling and pedestrian activity look like around that transit station, and what can they get to? So what does the access look like? So we came up with these different metrics. You can see here, you can have a comparison of looking at those 3 different scores to each other. We've got everything from land use and land use density, demographics, transit density, pedestrian and bicycle safety and access. So we wanted to sort of add in not only what is there in the built environment, but we wanted to look at some of the equity issues. We wanted to look at safety, look at bicycle and pedestrian crashes around transit stations to get an idea of what do those characteristics look like across the board for these different modes. So you can see here you've got a bar charts that shows you sort of how they score against each other. But you can also look at the raw data. So sometimes seeing a pretty chart is good, but maybe as a planner you want to know, well, all right, what is the population there, or how many bicycle or pedestrian accidents occurred within that catchment area. So we took a lot of that and we put in sort of the raw values and the raw scores so that the users could get an idea of what that looks like. And we also decided to put all of those different GIS data layers into the mapping application. So instead of it just being a map viewer where folks can just sort of see the final scores, we wanted to take all of those different layers and base layers and we wanted to add them into the map. Because we know that different stakeholders have different things they want to look at. They want to look at safety, maybe they want to look at transit activity, maybe they want to look at how many employees or employers are around those transit stations. So we wanted to make sure that we had that data. And we wanted to make sure that it was accessible and visible. And so put it into the mapping application for folks to use. And lastly, I want to talk about our sidewalk and street tree screening tool. So we built this tool to look at 4 different types of sort of areas or topics. One was something that's a lot more sort of popular, coming up in a lot of conversations around climate change, talking about sustainability. And that's extreme heat vulnerability. So we looked at extreme heat, equity, social equity issues, tree canopy coverage, and sidewalk density. So what this map does is it sort of identifies locations where we feel that sidewalk repair or street tree planting could have the greatest impact. So it's a sort of a quick tool to sort of allow local municipalities to look at different communities and sort of see where is there an overlap with these 4 different types of scoring, and maybe then start assessing and going out and taking a look at these communities. So like I said, we looked at 4 different categories, temperature score and social vulnerability score. So this was work that DVRPC had previously already had worked on a few years ago, and we have a report on it. And so that looks at sort of, like I said, those extreme surface temperatures at the census block level to get an idea of sort of where that's located, where those located, as well as equity, so some social vulnerability. So we can sort of see, we know every summer in the news, there's always the heat wave that comes in. They say, check on your elderly, make sure that they're doing well. So this is a good data set to sort of figure out in your communities where maybe some of this is occurring. But tree canopy density and sidewalk density were 2 other data sets we wanted to do some analysis and look, because if you walk around some of your neighborhoods and communities, you'll see that the street trees that are near some sidewalks are busting up your sidewalks. They're causing issues or sort of causing some problems. So what we decided to do was sort of put that all in a visual aspect so the communities can take a look, see maybe where these scores are high, and then maybe they can go out and sort of help do some potential field work. They can check on the sidewalk conditions. They don't have to drive every neighborhood. They don't have to go look at some of those that maybe score high, but it's a good precursor to sort of get an idea of like where can you send your staff, or where can we maybe look at some communities where we might be able to sort of make some improvements. And again, with this map, instead of just showing the map viewer, we put in all of the raw data and information. So you can actually click and identify on the map, and you can see the scores, not only the scores, but the raw numbers for those 4 different categories that we put in there. Quickly, just some additional resources as well. I know that there's a lot of information in different apps, but those of you that work in Delaware County, I'm pretty sure most of you are, Delaware County Planning Commission has their own open GIS portal. So if you haven't already been there as well, they've got a lot of really good resources and applications that you can get to there. I'm pretty sure they have GIS data that you can download and identify and have sort of that same Esri open data platform that I showed you with some of their information and data. They also have a new sustainability hub. So this is looking at electric vehicles, looking at flooding, looking at other issues that are sort of a little bit more hot topic that are out there. So they've got some cool web mapping applications that, you know, depending on what you're doing in your municipality or some planning you're doing, you might be able to find some resources here. You might be able to mash them up together, their resources and some of our resources, and get some of the answers that you're looking for. And lastly, I'll leave you with this. There's a new cool modern tools for map creation. So if you have zero GIS experience, there's a new tool out there called Felt that I'm seeing a lot of different communities that are utilizing that have really good and simple drawing tools. You can take information, whether it's GIS data or you can just draw on the map. You can create some really cool community flyers. There are different events that are going on in your community. So if you've got a local 5K, or if you're doing something, I know Earth Day just passed, but if you're looking for some public outreach, there's ways that you can add sticky notes and thumbnails on this application. So it's relatively new. I haven't had much experience playing with it, but it's a little bit easier to use than some of the ArcGIS Online platforms or other platforms that are out there. But it's getting good traction out there in the planning world as a really good tool that folks are using. So simple and easy to share on social media as well. Cool. That's it. Thank you for listening to my talk on all things GIS. So. Any questions that I can help you with? So my contact information's there. Feel free. I'm always available to sort of chat with you about any of our resources or help anyone get set up if they want to use our data or information. So.